Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Newsmaker Live with me, Kendall Burton. This evening we're joined by two special guests in the persons of Mary Isaac and Mr. Wilfred Pierre of the St. Lucia Civil Service Association. Obviously, by the names of the guests, you can tell what we'll be talking about. We're speaking about labor issues, trade unions, unemployment, a variety of issues related to those subjects. Thank you very much for being with us, Ms. Isaac and Mr. Pierre. I want to start our discussion by way of a little bit of history. The trade unions in the current form, as we know them, started in the Industrial Revolution, where most of the workers were untrained, unskilled, where the employer held most of the bargaining power. The union, basically, their role was largely or primarily to fight for wage increases. How has the role of the union changed over the years?
Well, really, if you look at the history of the trade unions, as you indicated, the history of the trade union also is a history of the cooperative movement. Mm-hmm. Because during the Industrial Revolution that you cited in 1844, because of the challenges that the members face, and that is members from trade union, where they could not get in the increases that they want, they decided that they're going to put their resources together and form the very first cooperative. And that was Equity. It was an Equity, Rocheville Equity Society. That was the very first cooperative, and it was a consumer cooperative. They put together all the resources that they have, and they opened a consumer store selling things like sugar, flour, candles, these kind of things. And that really set the stage for cooperatives development. Mm-hmm. And what we have done in the CSA is to begin to look at that and create that same kind of atmosphere. Because when you really look at the Industrial Revolution, it's similar to this situation that we have now in terms of the fiscal problems that we have, the kind of depression in terms of the economy and things like that, especially with the 2007, 2008. Mm-hmm. And you see countries having difficulty in meeting their obligations and things. So we as the CSA is looking at history full circle and recognizing that we need to do these things. And what we have done is to establish a multi-purpose cooperative to assist our members, similar to what the Rochdale Society did in establishing the first consumer cooperative. That was the flagship for the movement of cooperative development within on a historical perspective. So we have come full circle, and we have formed a multi-purpose cooperative with a view that we can do things for ourselves, not relying on governments increasing salaries, but partnering with government so that we can receive benefits for our members. So we have come full circle historically, so that we can be able to partner with whoever it is, government, to be able to provide the benefits for our members.
Anything you want to add to that, Ms. Isaac?
Well, let me just first say good night to your guests, and it's good to be back here after a very hard, tough year. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about the evolution of the trade union movement in terms of it having to try to cope with what has evolved right now, the financial crisis, and so on and so forth. And a lot of different, in different arenas, they are looking at what role does the trade union have to play right now. And we are saying that trade unions have to reposition themselves. They have to look at reform, economic reform, financial reform, and look at other ways and means of generating profits and benefits for members, as opposed to just maintaining their role as negotiator during negotiations for salary increases.
Now, during your last round of negotiations, there was a suggestion that political alliances have somewhat weakened the trade union movement. Is that a fair assessment? How do you respond to that?
I think that is a fair assessment. There is a lot of political involvement in, I would say, CSA, because I cannot speak for the other trade unions. And it is something that we try very hard to guard against. But you find that you do have the polarization, and it comes to bear every now and then. But I think, by and large, members sort of are able to rise above that at certain times and put the interests of the worker or themselves as workers first. And that is what we are trying to focus on more and more now, that members recognize that political parties come and go, right? And today one is here, tomorrow the other one is going to be there. So we cannot cause the union to be political. We have to look first and foremost for the interest of the members, because that is what is there to stay. You understand? So I think while we recognize that the politics plays a role, we always try to make sure that especially the leadership in the union, they cannot be political when they are looking at union affairs. They have to put their politics aside and deal with union matters on a neutral basis.
While we're on the subject of politics, one of the political parties has been engaged in a very public squabble. You've had your share of very public squabbles as well. Have those been resolved, or what is the status of the CSA at this point?
Well, I have always been able to rise above the politics. I believe that people have to play their politics. It is their constitutional right. But I believe that when it comes to trade union matters, you have to be able to put the politics aside. I think that after the impasse that we had, the members who were actually involved, the more active members, they are not focused on politics as much. And it is because they were not focused on the politics that those people who were able to participate did so openly. These are the members who really were able to put their politics aside. You understand? And participate as members who were agitating for something, standing up for something that they believe in. So once that was over, I believe these key people, the core group that was fighting for their rights, they have been able to put that aside and let us move on. And they're saying, let us move on, let us keep strengthening the movement, and let us do what it is that we need to do so that our union can move ahead.
But there's nothing strange about having division. I mean, even in families you have a division. And I was telling a friend of mine, even in heaven you end up having a division, which really causing the problems that we have now. But it's how you deal with this division that I mean really is key. And we have been trying our best not to let whatever division we have to be able to bring down the CSA. And I think we have done that. We have we have a new constitution, and the constitution we now have establishment of branches. We have just selected an election commission to really manage our elections process in April. They met day before yesterday, and so now we are setting the stage now for elections in April.
Some of the observers have suggested that there's somewhat of a crisis in the trade union movement. Do you agree or disagree?
I think there is, because a lot of the people who actually should be serving the union, and I really believe that our retirees should be playing a bigger role, because at that stage in your life you can come out and really stand up for what you believe in, right? And we're not seeing that. We're seeing more and more, we're seeing people who have to be at work, who feel they are taking their time off the job to come and serve the union. And I do not think that is a very good thing. I would like to see more of our seniors, our retirees, come and play more of a bigger role on the board of the union. Because what you find is sometimes you have very young people on the board, and these people are in grades that where they've never managed any business, any agency, any organization, any department, even in government. And these people are representing people like the permanent secretaries, people at grade 18, at grade 17, 16, and they themselves have never been in a management position. So you find that they do not really appreciate the role that they play in the trade union movement. And you find a lot of the times you want to convene meetings and they cannot come because they have to ask for permission from their supervisors to be there and that sort of thing. So
and really the thing now is it's not business as usual again. You cannot have trade unions just sitting there and not being proactive. You have to begin to do the research And we have been very active in doing the research, looking at what happened in our sister countries, evaluating it, seeing how we can position ourselves if that happens, getting information for them. And I think that is what one has to do. We have done intense analysis on the situation in Barbados, even to the extent that we recognize that what the Barbadian government has done, the first amount of persons that they had sent home came from the UDC, the Housing Development Corporation, 300 members. So it looks as though the first approach would be to target the statutory bodies. And that's what's happening in Barbados. So we are beginning to position ourselves to see, well, hey, we better look at that situation very, very carefully and see how we can position ourselves. So we are doing the analysis. And the analysis is not looking, because you heard the rumblings that you're hearing how many people they might send home, possible send home in St. Lucia. We have heard that, you know, but we haven't heard it in terms of getting it from the political director, the Prime Minister, or the Minister of the Public Service. We have not heard that, but we hear it. We hear people mentioning it. But we're not staying there. You know, we are actually preparing ourselves for when that matter comes to us, we'll be able to deal with that matter. So we can say, well, okay, where you can cut, right? Because we know the trend always is to cut the rank and file. Forget about the PSs and all the grade 20, 18. These are always sacred. You leave that. But we know that. So we are waiting for the situation. We have done the analysis ourselves, where we can tell government where they can cut and how we ourselves can create economic activity to help the country. I mean, it's more than just cutting. It's creating economic activity to take us out of the situation that we find ourselves in.
But is that to suggest that you've resigned to you've resigned yourself as a union, that this will happen, it's inevitable?
No, but when you juxtapose to what is happening in Barbados, you see in terms of our debt to service ratio, 78%. When you see what is being said by the Caribbean Development Bank, they just put out a bulletin on that, and you also looking at and seeing what Sir Dwight Venner has indicated. You beginning to see a pattern. Although there have been economic growth, but not significant growth like 3 to 5% that would take us out of that situation. That is a percentage that they have said we need to have growth about 3 to 5%. We're bordering in on 0.17. That is the kind of growth that we're looking at. So we need to do what it is that we need to do to be able to help the country to create economic growth. So that's on one side. The other side is to look at the analysis. If government decide that they're going to cut, where it is that we can begin to tell them that they should cut for true. You know, we have done that analysis and we're getting ready for that discussion. Okay, but again, the reality is there. But when you read some of these documents, I said the CDB report and Sir Dwight Venner report, it specifically says the areas that we should look at in terms of agriculture, in terms of the construction sector. I mean, that is an area that we've been talking about. To be able, you have a situation where there's a demand for housing, but the supply is not there for obvious reasons, because of the price of land, the inability to get access to capital. You know, all of these things are prohibiting our members from being able to access that. But that is a window for us to create economic activity in the country, because the construction sector, look at the amount of people that will receive jobs. And we just had a meeting today to look at an investor, a local investor, willing to invest $50-something million into housing for our members. That is what we want, and we're working with government so that can, it's not only to the benefit of our members, it creates economic activity. And so Dwight Venner identify that this is one area. Not only Dwight Venner, when you look at the article, the IMF Article 4 consultation that takes place every year, that is one area they suggest, the construction sector. We really need to energize our construction sector. And we were a little surprised that even in the House yesterday, that the Prime Minister had made an announcement on the stimulus package that is going to end on the 28th. I mean, we felt so bad about that thing. And we're going to go back to him and have some discussion, because here we, as the CSA, is beginning to work with an investor so that we can get housing for our members and also to spill off economic activity. And by invariably, we would need to have the stimulus package to work on that. Take into consideration what Sir Dwight Venner says. We have to begin to energize the economy that we have. If we don't do that, and we're only thinking of just cutting, when you cut 3,000 persons in St. Lucia, you see the chaos you're going to have? You have a situation where the unemployment rate has moved from 23% to another point, 24 point something percent. And you're going to put some more people on that? The chaos that you're going to have in St. Lucia. So we have to take the argument further. Where can we get to increase economic activities? Foreign direct investment? Or do we also look at resource mobilization? We have not looked at that. I mean, the Prime Minister, during his budget last year, I think, talked about an institute of planning, a planning institute, like they have in Jamaica.
Manifesto.
I mean, this is something that we really need in St. Lucia. This planning institute in Jamaica has done wonders in bringing innovative resources to the country. And even just for me to cite you an example, in 2012, the Planning Institute of Jamaica prepared a proposal and submitted to what you call adaptation fund. That is a fund that under the UN is responsible to provide grant funding, right, for climate change adaptation initiatives, like, for example, CSA, Climate Smart Agriculture, to build seawalls and that kind of thing. And Jamaica was able, through the planning unit, to prepare a proposal and to get 25 million EC dollars. We have not submitted a proposal to that funding stream. So I'm saying we need to look at resource mobilization as key also. As key, instead of looking at just trying to cut the rank and file, which will make the problem even worse. So we have to begin to look at innovative ways of mobilizing resources. The South-South Corporation, the ALBA, people can say what they want about ALBA. I think ALBA is a good initiative. We can say, well, they are rogue countries we're dealing with. But when you begin to sit down and look at one of the worst period in our history was slavery. And the slavery was committed by the Europeans, more so the English. But we're still getting resources from them. We are happy to get resources from England and from the thing. What have the other person done us? What has Venezuela done us? What has Cuba done us at that level? But yet still we don't want to get resources from them because there's a link with them with either Libya or Iran. Our backs are on the wall, but we're trying to figure out who we should get resources from. I mean, we have to begin to be critical about these things. We cannot say, well, okay, but these people have aligned themselves with terrorism, so we're not going to deal with them. But yet still, there are persons that have enslaved us. That's the worst thing that can happen to persons in the Caribbean. Yet still we're receiving resources from them gladly receiving resources. So the point I'm making is that we have to rethink the way how we're doing things. We have to begin to look at innovative ways for us to be able to get resources for St. Lucia. And as I indicated, the way we have to do that is to set up this resource mobilization unit, or get the planning unit in place to do that. I did a consultancy for the Ministry of Physical Planning to set up a resource mobilization strategy. That is there and have cataloged all the various areas that you can get funding from, traditional and non-traditional funding. That is, and I even took that document. When I did that document, I went to the Ministry of Planning and indicate to them that there were resources available under the adaptation fund. Nobody has submitted anything towards that. Jamaica did, and they received their $25 million. So I think that is an area that we really have to look at and not just thinking about cutting people out. And I mean, that should be the last resort.
You alluded to it earlier, and in your just completed response, you've touched on the fact that the role of the union has changed primarily from a wage-oriented negotiation type organization to dealing with a lot of other issues. You touched on climate change and all sorts of other issues. What are some of the biggest challenges that you have in making that transition and getting those issues addressed?
I think the biggest challenge is to be able to get our members to understand that, to be able to get them sensitized that things have changed. We need to have a different approach to how trade unions operate. And I mean, we have the multipurpose cooperative, and we do have persons in it, but they need to come on board to assist you know, to assist the CSA so that we can begin to make these advancements, you know. So it is to change, it's a cultural change, it's a mindset change to get persons to recognize that the union is not only there, you know, in terms of when you have a grievance, but it's also there to help government. And we have to be able, whatever government is in place, that is the government we have to work with. So you cannot say, well, Pierre and Mary, them people are Labour Party supporters because you make a pronouncement that you want to partner with government. I mean, these are the kind of, we have to get persons to recognize this is the government of the day. We don't have to wait for 2 years. So we're going to just sit down and wait for 3 years with the expectation that another party comes in that will do the things that we want. No, no, no. The problems are facing us now. And we need to work with whatever party that exists in order for us to be able to get the benefits for our members. That's why I mentioned to you, the Prime Minister made a statement about this, the stimulus package is going to stop. And we're going to write to him about that and tell him what we're doing and why we would need the stimulus package to still continue. Okay?
But I think he made he gave an explanation rather for why it could not continue.
Yes, I mean, if we begin to look at just fiscal and tax, because you actually losing on a lot of duties, but you have to weigh that as to how do you create economic activity and employment. Employment is going up. You know, who you going to tax? When you tax, is who you taxing? Taxing is you tax individuals. So if you can get the individuals to a position where they get gainfully employed, all well and good, you can tax them now. But if you're going to create a situation where you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to do away with this stimulus package, that's going to create economic activity, but because I want to save on the duties and the VAT that would have been lost and things. So that argument, I think, is an argument that we really against. We feel that you have to now begin to zero in on stimulating the economy. And the way you stimulate is for a stimulus package. And to look at the construction sector, look at agriculture. I mean, Dwight Venner mentioned about the agriculture sector and tourism also, as these are the free areas to really spur economic activity. If we begin to think of more thinking in terms of saving government taxes, we're not going to go anywhere.
Because if the people are not employed, how can they afford to buy anything? And if they're not purchasing, where do you get the tax from? You understand? I mean, so it's sort of a chicken and egg situation.
It kind of worries us when you see things that happen in Barbados and people say, boy, it's Bajans think they so and so and so and so. That's the argument that they made. But they don't understand that when problems in Barbados, especially problems that are happening now, it affects us because Barbados is our second, we export our second largest. Trinidad is the largest person that we send within the Caribbean that we export to, and Barbados is the next one. Once you get a reduction of 3,000 people out of a job, who's going to buy your goods? That's 3,000 people that maybe will not be able to buy your goods. So you look at invariably that when you look at imports now from St. Lucia into Barbados will be reduced significantly. So what happens in Barbados is of concern to us, you know. But people don't look at it. They just feel, oh, Bajans, boy, them fellas think they're the best thing. But they don't realize by saying that, if this thing continues, we are going to be affected. Because apart from Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados is our biggest importer in the Caribbean, and not the United States and all, but in the Caribbean, Barbados is the second. Over close to $8 million from Barbados every year we import.
Mr. Isaac, you've been very unusually quiet this evening.
I think I take it over. No, I'm just listening because, you know, what Mr. Pierre is saying is so relevant, you understand? But people in St. Lucia, it's almost as though we go about business, it's business as usual. We had a flood, now the flood is over, we don't bother. We wait until the next rain to see if the river is going to go up as high. We don't put things in place to prevent it from doing so. And Mr. Pierre just mentioned the disaster mitigation fund or something.
Right.
They could look at that to maybe build a river wall.
That's correct.
You understand?
That's
to prevent
Jamaica
the river from going into. We don't do any planning. We have DCA. Everything gets approved. People park their car on the road. They build a home and they park their car on the road. And you know, we just, it's like life goes on as usual, nothing changes. But we have to look at reform, and not just fiscal reform. We have to look at reform in its entirety. We have to change the way that we live, change the way that we do things. We have to look at things that are sustainable, and this is where I want to segue into the pension problems that we are having now. Now we are hearing that the pensions, it's not sustainable, and but then what is being done about it? We have a situation where public service has two different pension streams before 2003. After 2003, people who came in after 2003, eventually down the road, maybe about in 40 years' time, that will neutralize. But you still have the two streams where you have people who get a government pension and retire at 55, and people who get an NIC pension. They retire at 55 because they're in the same public service, but they get nothing until they reach the age of 62, and that's going to go up to 65. So now you have a lot of people who have been driven into poverty when they retire at 55. And some people think it is an automatic thing that you stay on until you're 62 because you pay NIC, but it is not. You have to apply, and it's a very subjective process. A lot of the time it's who you know. You understand? That depends on whether you actually get to stay on a month-to-month basis or year-to-year basis. Some people were actually asked to leave at 55, and that drove them into poverty, where they lost their home, had to move in with their children, and so on and so forth. So we have to look at the situation. Then it is, now we are saying it's unsustainable, but I am sure when the studies were done, there were recommendations to indicate that this thing would be unsustainable. You understand? But maybe it was not politically expedient at the time to do the right thing. But now it is coming back to bite us. Okay,
we're due for a break. Let's take that break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Our guests this evening, Mr. Wilfred Pierre and Ms. Mary Isaac of the St. Lucia Civil Service Association. We'll be right back.